may be dismissed to go with Miss Julie to Kids Club. And as I said before, last week and the week before, we have some very special guests with us. The Todd family is here to present with us today, for us today. They are our missionaries, Church of God missionaries to Brazil, and our church specifically partners with them in their ministry. And so he reached out to us a few weeks ago and said, I'm going to be in town for the convention, and we're wondering, could we stop by and could we share with you a little bit about our ministry? It's been a few years since they've been here, and so we want to go ahead and just invite them up this morning, and they are going to share a little bit about their ministry to Brazil.
Oh, there we are. I had to take it off the stand. I'm short. And now that our hurricane of children have gone to children's church, yeah, they are nonstop. But we wanted to thank you so much for having us over for a little visit. We're happy to be here and see you. And I remember when we were here last, and this is such a beautiful church. And I'm like, oh, yeah, this one. It's so pretty. I love it down here. So, yeah, thank you so much. We wanted to share a little bit about what we're doing in Brazil and what the churches are doing, and all kinds of good news. But first off, would you like to share any greeting in Portuguese, or?
You go for it. I've been doing a lot in Portuguese.
I'll tell you, good morning. I think we said that it was like 4 years ago. You might remember, you might not. It doesn't matter. But good morning in Portuguese is bom dia. So bom dia. Oh, look at y'all. Smart ones here. In Brazil, they speak Portuguese, and that's what we live our life in, is in Portuguese. And so I wanted to teach y'all a phrase this morning in Portuguese that is part of a famous song, but it's a really good word. It's mais de ti, menos de mim. So mais means more. De ti means of you. So we're talking about God. And menos means less. De mim, of me. So more of you, less of me. So mais de ti, menos de mim. There you go. Mais de ti, menos de mim. And that is what we have seen so much of in Brazil. I want to talk a little bit, too, about some verses from Matthew. So let's go, slide, guys. Wow. There we go. So this is the Great Commission, right? This is the great go and do this that Jesus tells us to do. It's in the end of the book of Matthew. This is after he has been raised from the dead, but before he ascends to heaven. And he's telling his disciples this. So I'm going to ask y'all a question. Who in here loves Jesus? Raise your hand. Who in here wants to follow Jesus? Raise your hand. Who in here wants to do what Jesus tells him to do? Raise your hand. Oh, you're a disciple too. So he's telling this to you and to me and to all of us. So he says, all authority in heaven and in earth has been given to me. Therefore is always an important word in Scripture. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. Jesus tells us to do this. Not just me, not just your pastor, every single one of y'all sitting out here. This is what Jesus says do. And go doesn't always mean go live somewhere on the other side of the world or wherever else. It just means get your heart in a posture to go to someone else. You go to your neighbor, go across the street, go to the other side of town, go to the other town over, go to the other state. He just says go. And so one of the other verses that is also in Matthew, it's Matthew chapter 10, verse 39. And this is in the middle of a very strong and difficult passage if you want to read it at some point. But it's so powerful. He says, this is Jesus speaking, he says, if you cling to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for me, you will find it. Those are strong words, right? So much of what we see when we visit different churches and visit different people, we see churches that are growing, we see churches that are stagnant, and we see churches that are closing. We see it all over the place. In Brazil, too. Growing, stagnant, and closing. And what makes the difference are those who don't cling to their own life, who don't cling to their comfort, right? But who have that willingness to put God first, to go. When you base your life in Jesus, everything else works out. When you're willing to say no to the little things, the little comfortable things that you want, growth happens, right? And one of the things that I have learned from being in Brazil where we are is I love to garden. I have so many plants at home. It's a new world living in a tropical environment, let me tell you. But one of the plants that I have are hibiscus, right? They grow these big, beautiful tropical flowers. And when you have them in a pot, they can grow some flowers. They're pretty, they're lovely, but they stay small. They're in their own comfy little world. They stay small. They produce some beautiful things, but they don't really grow too big. However, if you take them out of that pot and you put them in the ground, the sun shines on them stronger. They're in the wind, which makes their stem stronger. I'm sure it's not very comfortable. Their roots have to navigate all the other roots in the ground and the dirt and the rocks and everything. But you know what happens to those plants when they get a little uncomfortable out of their little pot and they go out there? They get big. I've got some that are this big. They're getting bigger. They have blooms all over it. They're beautiful. And they grow because they're not sitting in their comfortable little spot, right? And we see that time and again in so many different churches. The ones that don't sit still in their comfy spots and they go, like Jesus says, that's when they grow. And we've seen that happen in Brazil so often in some particular churches. And I'm going to tag in with Jonathan for him to tell you about it. So he's coming down the aisle. Watch him go. Cheetah speed, Jonathan, cheetah speed.
I heard cheesecake. I was like, yes.
Tag, you're it.
So one thing we learned really early on in our ministry is we started visiting churches as we were preparing to go to Brazil right about the time Miriam was born. And we learned very quickly if Miriam was up here with us, nobody paid attention to us. And so we started the tag team thing, and we've just continued with that. You can go forward another slide and probably one more past that. There you go. So we are in Brazil, and before we talk about Brazil, we're going to do a very quick geography lesson. If you didn't know, Brazil is really big. It is roughly the size of the lower 48 United States. It's very, very large. To put in perspective kind of those distances, if you see that purple star down near the bottom, that's the city of Campinas, and that's where we went to language school. And that red star at the top is Itaituba. That's where we live now. The distance between those two locations is roughly the distance between Anderson, Indiana, and Los Angeles, California. It's actually a little further than that. And so as you can imagine, when you're talking distances that large, cultures change, language changes, food changes. And so Brazil is a really diverse country when it comes to language, culture, food. And as the only Church of God missionaries in Brazil, we get to experience some of that, which is a joy and sometimes a challenge. Even just this morning, I was wishing some pastors Happy Father's Day. Father's Day in Brazil is actually August 12th, right? August 12th? Yes, which means I get 2 Father's Days. Beth only gets 1 Mother's Day. Not fair, but you also get International Women's Day, which they celebrate pretty big in Brazil. So I was just telling them, Happy Father's Day. It's a different day in the U.S. And one of them was teaching me terms for father that I had never heard before, which was pretty awesome. So we were learning that. One other thing to put into perspective is for the Church of God. We have 96 Church of Gods right now in Brazil. Across the country, we have them as far south as you can go, We have them as far north as you can go in Boa Vista, Roraima, which is that part kind of towards the left that's real tall. We have them in Porto Velho, and by the end of the year, we'll have them actually even further west. And then we have them as far east as you can go in Natal. And so for the Church of God, we are literally in all parts of Brazil. In the Amazon region, which is that dark green area where we live, we have about 30 churches. It's a moving target. They are planting churches faster sometimes than I can keep count. So I don't remember if that 30 number is recent or not. So you can go to the next slide. We live in the city of Itaituba. Itaituba is a small river town in the middle of the Amazon River. It sits on the banks of the Tapajós. And something really cool about that is the Church of God was one of the early churches there in the 70s. In the 70s, it was a very small town of a few thousand people. There was very little going for Itaituba. Really, the only thing of importance for it is that it sat along the Trans-Amazon Highway where you cross the Tapajós River. And if you wanted to go further into the interior and carry goods there, you probably had to pass through Itaituba as you were going upriver, more into the Amazon. And so Itaituba was a hub of trading, but there really wasn't very much to it. But then in the very early 80s, gold was found in that region. And Brazil experienced a gold rush along the lines of the California gold rush. And so in just a couple of short years, the small airport in Itaituba became the busiest airport in the world for takeoffs and landings. More than 400 flights a day were entering and leaving Itaituba. It grew very, very quickly. And just as that had happened, the Church of God had arrived in the very late 70s. So if you see that red circle, that's not very good because I did it with my finger on my iPad. That is the location of the very first Church of God in Itaituba. And that is really where most of the work in the Amazon has gone from. Now today, you can see it's right where the ferry lands. It's right in the middle of the business district. We no longer have a church there. We still own the land, but that's more business's mission. We rent that building out, several buildings actually, to support ministries. And so there's a feed store there. There's a power tool store, mostly steel products, and then several others that we rent to. So that brings in money. You can go to the next slide. We have a primary role in Brazil, and it kind of has come in seasons how much we're involved with the seminary. But our primary role, the reason we went, was for leadership development and to work with the seminary, specifically the Instituto Teológico Boa Terra, or the Theological Institute Good Earth, or the Good Earth Theological Institute, however you want to turn that around. There are now 3 of them around Brazil. We have one in the north. That's the one we work most directly with. There is one in the south. That's the original one, founded just 51 years ago by Maurice Caldwell, if anyone knows that name, Maurice and Dondina Caldwell. They were professors at Warner for some years as well. And then there's now an online seminary that we are working with. And if you want to hear the amount of stress we had in the last 6 weeks getting ready to teach a course for that, we'll tell you afterwards. I don't think we slept for about 2 weeks. It's the first time we've had to have all of the material done, all of the lectures recorded, everything finished before it started. But our most direct involvement is with the seminary in Itaituba. And I put up these 2 pictures because on the left is a group of 5 students that are currently planting a church in the community of Apuí, which is 14 hours into the interior of the rainforest. If you turn out of our house and start driving in basically a straight line for 14 hours through the jungle on dirt roads, you will arrive where this church is. Actually, you do have to take a left turn onto the road their church is on. And so as their final internship, as they prepare to graduate, they were sent with a pastoral couple to begin planting a church there and starting a work there. That is part of a long-term goal we've had in Amazonia of having one church in every state by the end of 2023. And I'll tell you why that's important in a minute. But those 5 students are the ones that are there right now. One thing that's interesting is they all have very different callings. Some have callings to local ministry. Some have callings to work with youth. The young woman on the right with the dangly earrings, she feels called to be a missionary in Norway. Why Norway? That's a good question. She's not even sure. She just very clearly feels that call. But they have been living out of their comfort zone for the last few months, living in the interior, helping start a church literally from nothing, with no members to start with. Their first service was just a few weeks ago, the day before Easter, and they had 60 children attend for a children's program. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. The 5 on the left, they are preparing to go at the end of this month to the northeast region of Brazil. The northeast region is where we have some churches. These churches have not had a lot of help for some years. Frankly, some of them have not been very healthy because of some interpersonal issues with pastors and leaders. But over the past 2 years, some leaders we work with have been working with them to help bring some healing in place. Those churches are once again beginning to grow as they step outside of their own selves and start working with each other and start looking into their community through various projects. And so these 5 are going to another region they've never been to. Most of them have never been on a plane. Some of them have never left much beyond the city of Itaituba. They've only traveled 2 or 3 hours by bus. And so they're going to a place that's very different to them. The food is very different. The language is different. When I'm there, I have trouble understanding people there sometimes. And so they are saying, you know what? We're going for a month. We're going to do kids camps. They're going to work with the churches, encourage them. But part of why we're sending them is to get them outside of their comfort zone and let them experience something very new and very different to them. One thing to mention, just because it is Father's Day, the young man, second from the right with the glasses, if you keep him in your prayers, his name's Adolfo. He lost both of his parents just before he started seminary, and then he lost his brother-in-law and nephew about a week ago in another region. Thankfully, a pastor was able to drive him across the northern part of Brazil to get him to the funeral. You can go to the next slide. Miriam and Jonah, you have seen them in their enthusiasm this morning, but I do want to mention them. They both go to school, all in Portuguese. There is no English-speaking school in our city, and we wouldn't send them to one if there was one anyway. Everyone in our city speaks Portuguese, so we want them to speak that. Beyond going to school in the mornings, which they kind of love, they kind of don't. I was going to include Jonah's first day of school picture, but it is not a happy picture. So I left it out. Miriam goes to an after-school program every afternoon for an hour to an hour and a half with one of our church ministries called Projeto Socioeducativo Malcooperadora, the social education project of Helping Hands, which is our Church of God social ministry in Brazil. And so she goes for homework help and for just sort of reinforcement. I don't remember what the term is in English. Tutoring, basically tutoring. They have really focused the last couple of years on helping kids in grades 1 to 3 especially, because they realized that they were out of school for a full year during COVID. And so that is the age group that has most needed some help getting them back up to speed. Jonah does not go, but hopefully he will soon. He's almost old enough. And they both love fishing, just like their mother. So that's a picture with one of the first fish Jonah caught this past year. Not included is a picture of the piranha he caught. We should have done that too. It is like that big. You can go to the next slide. And so I had the joy at the end of March, actually April 1st, is when we left driving to visit the newest Church of God in Brazil. And that's that church in the interior of Apuí. And so one of the goals we've had in Amazonia is that as we approach 2023, we're approaching our 100-year anniversary of the Church of God in Brazil. It's 100 years old this year, which means we've had all kinds of events across the country, and there's more to come. And one of the goals we had was to have one church in every state in Amazonia of the 7 states before the end of 2023. This is number 6. So we had one more church to go after this. We still have one church to go, which may or may not happen because one of our women pastors is battling cancer right now, and her parents are the ones who are going to go. And I've encouraged them not to go plant that church. I've encouraged them to spend time with their daughter and help with the family. So we'll see. They're a little bullheaded. But they are helping get this church started. And Oresti, that leader, is the one that had identified Apuí. The reason is Apuí is only a few hundred miles from another Church of God that's in the Amazon that's pretty isolated. It's pretty far from any other Church of God. And so it let us put 2 congregations within a few hundred miles of each other. And then after we'd made that decision, they actually planted another church a couple hundred miles in the other direction. So now we have 3 churches that, while not close to each other, they're close enough that they can be a little more support to one another than if they were all spread out in different parts of the states. Their focus has been, as they plant this church, twofold. One is to focus on children in the community. While there are some churches in the community of Apuí, most of them don't have much in the way of children's programming. And our church is based in a house that is located in a neighborhood with no churches. And so as the students were looking around, they said, what do we have? Who is the group that we can really meet the fastest and the easiest and has nothing really for them? And the answer was children. And so the 2 days before Easter on Good Friday, they started walking in the neighborhood and started inviting kids and said, if you want to come to church, we're going to have a program just for you on Saturday afternoon. And so they walked around and invited them, and they hoped for 10 or 20 kids. That would be a really good turnout. And they had more than 60. Not only did they have more than 60, but parents came, which is not always a given. So immediately we had children coming in, we had parents coming in, and in just a few short weeks, half a dozen of those kids were accepting Christ. And so what we're seeing is these students that are far from their families, they're far from their comfort zone, they're far from anywhere they've really ever been, but they're living out the calling God has given them, and they are so excited to see the growth that's happening. One way you can be praying for this church in Appleby is that at the end of the month, we'll be bringing them back to Itaituba because they graduate on July 13th. I think it's July 13th. It's a Thursday from seminary. And we're not really sure who's going as pastor next. We've been praying about it as a group. Some of us have ideas. I'm not in charge. But we're looking towards who's going to go serve there long term as we've gotten the work going, as we've got the base of some leadership from the community who's going to go and serve next. You can go to the next slide. In the span of a month, not only did I go to the newest Church of God in Brazil, I went to the oldest Church of God in Brazil. It's in Santa Catarina, which is way down in the south. And on April 23rd, 1923, some immigrants from Germany that were all from the Church of God had decided they were going to plant a church since they had moved to Brazil anyway. And so they got together and they started planning on Easter Sunday, 1923. That was April 23rd. They had their first service. And so this right here is the mother church of all nearly 100 Church of Gods across Brazil. It all springs forth from a handful of immigrants and pastors who started it. This is not the original building. They quickly outgrew the original building. And so about 70 years ago, they built this newer building. I got to visit it for their 100th anniversary for that big church service. We didn't hold it in the building because there wasn't space. Praise the Lord. We had a big tent outside, and there still wasn't space. We had people in the grass. We had people in the road. We had people everywhere, but it was wonderful. The people in the picture are the current students of the Southern Seminary in Curitiba. I got to travel with them for a few days. You can go to the next slide. One of the things I have struggled with in ministry, and I'm going to be real honest, is hospitality. I don't know if any of y'all has anyone ever taken a spiritual gift survey? You know, the things you're gifted in. You can find them online. They're very easy to find. I had to take one in seminary. And out of all of the giftings, the absolute bottom one for me, like I barely even blipped on it, was hospitality. I don't have a hospitable bone in my body. I am an introvert. I want to be at home. I want to be where it's quiet. I don't enjoy hosting people. I never have. Like, I'll be real honest with you. Yet we get to Brazil, and what did we get thrown into in language school? And it was people hosting us. The church we first worshiped with was a Baptist church, because there was no Church of God within about a 4-hour drive of where we lived. And so we started attending a Baptist church, and some people in there very quickly adopted us. They made sure we were invited to church picnics, to birthday parties. One family invited us into their home for Christmas Eve, which is when Brazilians celebrate Christmas. They stay up until midnight, and then it's Christmas, and that's when you start opening presents. And so they had invited us into their home. We barely knew them, and they said, you need a place to go for Christmas. You're coming with us. And so especially as we were raising funds to go to Brazil, and then in our first year in Brazil, we just experienced radical hospitality from people in ways we never really expected, in ways that were frankly uncomfortable for me. And so as we, in the past couple of years, have moved into what's called the missionary house, it had been built for missionaries about 20 years before, we started realizing we need to host people for some different things. In Brazil, you don't make friends by going somewhere together. You make friends by sitting on the porch and drinking tea together, or drinking lemonade, or tereré, which is a type of tea, and doing things. But so much of building relationships in Brazil is just sitting on the porch of someone's house and spending time together. And so that's something we've been learning to do, that I have been learning to do, and God has really been pushing me into. And there's a couple of instances where it's really stood out to us this year. One of those was this young couple on the left, Alessandro and Iana. They're seminary students in their second year. And they just had a baby March 8th, somewhere around there, March 10th. We don't remember the date. We should remember. May 8th, May 10th, something. We should remember because they were in our house. We were taking them to the hospital like every 4 hours for checkups. But our seminary is located about 10 miles out of town on bumpy dirt roads. And Beth just informed them, you cannot stay out at the farm after giving birth. You need to be in town for doctor's appointments. You need to be in town for family to visit you. You need someplace to stay. Come stay with us. We had built a small apartment out back behind our house so that we could host family and host groups from the U.S., and Beth said, come stay with us. And she went to battle with them a little bit with the seminary directors to say, hey, we're taking them out of seminary for a few months. They need that time as a family. And so since the beginning of May, they've been in our house. They have been such a blessing. It's been growing out of my comfort zone even more to have someone always there. And just to watch this young couple as they are starting to raise a child and build a family together, and helping them understand the life of serving in ministry when you have family, when you have children to care for, and teaching them how to take time to take care of their family, how to take a pause from ministry and from studies, to take care of each other. And it's been a wonderful blessing. In fact, they're house sitting for us right now with our circus of 2 dogs, 3 cats, and 3 aquariums full of fish. Last night they stopped having water, but he fixed it. It was a minor problem. And so that's one opportunity where we've really been able to serve the seminary. We also have seminary students every Monday morning for breakfast as they travel back into town from their weekend internships in churches outside of town. They spend Monday morning with us eating breakfast. Sometimes we talk, sometimes we play Mario Kart, and sometimes we hang up a bunch of hammocks and they all take naps because they've traveled all night by bus. On the left, that's our air conditioner guy, Reginald. He fixes our ACs, he fixes our fridge. He's a member of the church and a dear, dear friend. Everyone needs someone you can call at midnight when you have a problem in your house and need help fixing it, and that's my friend who I call. And so he had been wanting to learn to make hamburgers. They hold hamburgers in like high esteem from the U.S. And so just before Beth's parents left from visiting us over Christmas, we had grilling hamburgers together. So that's his wife's picture, but I wanted to toss that out there. I love my flat top. You can go to the next slide. One of the things that we're really discovering as we talk with pastors, we talk with church members, and especially as we talk with seminary students, is we go nowhere in Brazil that we do not meet someone who says, God is calling me to be a missionary. In virtually every church we visit across the country, virtually every seminary, every event, there are people that seek us out and say, God is calling me to be a missionary. What do I do? One of those is that couple in the top left. They are recent graduates of the seminary. Their parents, his parents are actually the directors of the seminary. Jefferson is an incredibly gifted musician and singer. In fact, he was the front man for a band in town that was hired by a lot of churches, and actually very famous Christian artists, when they would come to our region, would hire that band to be their backing if they couldn't bring their full band with them. And so he was the leader of a very, very up-and-coming Christian band in the region. And he and I had traveled together. We spent a lot of time together, and he was saying, Jonathan, I love music. I love serving in that way, but God is calling us to ministry. We've completed seminary, but we know what God is calling us to is not to serve as a local pastor. We want to go share in schools. We want to go share on street corners. We want to share through music, through theater, through dance. And there's no structure in the Church of God to support ministries like that are outside of the local church. And so we've been praying together, and a pastor in another region approached him and said, hey, we would like to hire you as our associate pastor, you and your wife, and give you a tremendous amount of freedom to begin sharing in schools. And he started, what this pastor was sharing with him was the vision Jefferson and his wife had been praying for several years. And so just over the past few months, they've been settling into that role in ministry, leaving their family behind to live somewhere else. It's been difficult. Tylita, the wife, was crying a few weeks ago as the entire family was sick, and they had no direct family. They've always lived near their parents to help them. But through those struggles, through those difficulties, they're getting to live out a calling that even a year ago seemed like an impossible dream for them. The seminary from the south down there on the bottom, as I spent a week with them, at least 3 or 4 different couples came and sat down with me and said, God is not calling me to pastor a local church. God is calling me to be in ministry that's different. Maybe it's to be as a chaplain. Maybe it's to be as a missionary. Maybe it's to serve in a social ministry. What does that look like? And so we've been talking and we've been praying and seeking the Lord's face how that works out. And this young lady on the right side is Marcia. Marcia is from Argentina. She has completed seminary there. She speaks English fluently. She speaks Portuguese pretty well. She's been living in Itaituba with our seminary for 2 months now. She's just beginning her 3rd month in Itaituba. God is calling her to be a missionary in Japan. But for the Church of God across Latin America, we have no sending agency. We have no structure to send missionaries to other countries. And so Marcia, as we had met her a few months ago and talked with her, and as some other missionaries had, a pastor in Brazil said, Marcia, I know it's not Japan, but you need to come spend some months in Itaituba, northern Brazil with us. You've never lived outside of Argentina. You've never lived away from your family. And so if God is calling you across the world, why don't you come spend some time with us and start expanding out your calling, starting to investigate what it's like to be out of your comfort zone and to be away from your family. And so she's been there for almost 3 months. We're going to see if we can get her visa extended another 3 months. But she's been traveling around northern Brazil with the seminary students during their internships. And this is her yesterday. She was going to get on a bus to go live with one of the Trans-Amazon churches more into the interior for the next month, teaching some programming with them. And so what we're seeing is these seminary students, these young men and women, and some of them not so young, saying, God is calling me to ministry. And they're calling me in ways I had never imagined, and in ways our churches and our pastors had never imagined. And it's really easy to say, you know what, we don't do that. We don't have the money. We don't have the structure for that. It's a whole lot harder to say, you know what, we see the call that you're feeling. We see how God is opening doors in other forms of ministry. And instead of our churches turning away from them, the churches are saying, we're going to bless you. We're going to pray for you. We don't know how we're going to do it, but we're ready to send you. You can go to the next slide. So how can you help? You can click a little bit. The first is to pray. And I actually wrote down some prayer requests last night on my phone because I couldn't find a piece of paper. But you can keep clicking. It's fine. 1, pray for our pastors and our leaders. Pray specifically, I'm going to give you a name, Daniel and Lillian. Pastor Danielle Pereza, Lillian Pereza, serve in the community of Tocantins, and she is battling her 2nd round of cancer. She had breast cancer some years ago. It was found very quickly. She went through treatment and had done really well. But over the past few months, that cancer has come back. She had lost complete use of her right arm due to cancer nodules in her shoulder. Radiation therapy has helped. She's done a round of biopsies and met with an oncologist, and the oncologist said these results are not definitive. We don't know what to do with you. And so she's had to redo all of her testing. And so they're really frustrated how slow it's going. But it's been a really difficult time for the churches. And so keep them in your prayers. Specifically for seminary students, pray for Rodolfo. Rodolfo is a lovely student. He has spent an awful lot of time in our house. He's an orphan. Just before seminary started, he had tongue surgery early in the year, and it got badly infected, and he wasn't eating or drinking. And so I got tasked with taking him to the doctor and then taking him to the hospital. And the poor guy, the nurse started yelling at him, "Why are you so sick?" And he couldn't talk because his tongue was infected. Ooh. And I said, a church member came and found me, and she said, you need to talk with the doctors for him. And so I went and met with them. I explained what was going on. And then as soon as he got back to our house and was going to arrange for a ride back out to the seminary, Beth said, you're not leaving this house. You stay here. And for the next almost 2 weeks, Nurse Beth took care of him, ran interference for responsibilities that he had, because no one else really was there to take care of him. And so we wanted to get him back to full health. Pray for our new believers. We have people getting saved every Sunday across our churches. On Easter Sunday, the largest church of God in Brazil, located across the street from our house, decided it was time to start a new ministry. There's a large deaf population in Itaituba, and there is no church that has a ministry for hearing impaired. And so they sought out people who could be hired as sign language interpreters. And on Easter Sunday this year, they held their first service in sign language as well as in Portuguese. And on that first Sunday, on Easter Sunday, we had 6 people that had never heard the gospel before get saved. And the week before we left, so the last week in May, we had 2 of them get baptized. And so we have new believers. But when you come to Christ, your life changes, and it changes for the better, but it can be difficult. And in Brazil, when you get saved, sometimes that means stepping back from practices that your family does that aren't necessarily aligned with Christ. Maybe it means leaving some of those friends that you have. When you get saved, it can be a little difficult, sometimes a lot of difficult. So pray for the new believers that we have coming to Christ. And pray for us. We are here in the U.S. for a month. In fact, we leave 2 weeks from today to go back. We're only here for a short time. And so we head after the service to Tampa for meetings with other missionaries. And I would ask that you pray for our missionaries and our international pastors that are all traveling in. We have a lot of Church of God missionaries traveling in today. Some are traveling in later in the week, but almost every missionary with the Church of God is going to be present in Tampa. And that's the first time we have all been together in many, many years. And we have a large number of international guests coming that are flying in over the next couple of days. So I ask that you be in prayer for them. If you don't know this, when you fly into the U.S. and you have a visa to enter, that doesn't guarantee your entry into the U.S. A Customs and Border Patrol officer can talk to you as you're coming in, look at your passport and visa and say, nope, you can't come in. And they can send them right back to their country of origin. And so pray for those pastors. Just because they have their visas in hand doesn't mean they have guaranteed entry into the U.S. And that's a scary thing. They've taken a step in faith, spending the money on very expensive airline tickets, booking hotels, booking all their accommodations for this week. And we pray that they can be here, but it's not guaranteed until they exit the airport. So keep them in your prayers. You can go to the next part. Financially, we just want to say thank you for partnering with us. Thank you for walking with us. Thank you for having us with you. It has been such an honor to visit back here. If y'all don't know this, I grew up in Jacksonville. So this part of the state is my home. I used to scuba dive, and my first dive without an instructor was at Jenny Springs. I've gone scuba diving there many, many times. I was dying to take my kids to the Ishnatucknee River this weekend, but Jonah gets too cold too easily. He would not survive that. But this has been like coming home a little bit for me. So thank y'all for having us. If you would like to support ministries for church planting in Amazonia, we do have a project that's helping fund those last 2 churches. And the funds for that go not to paying a pastor's salary, but it goes to things like buying the 30 chairs you need to start a church, or buying the tables to have dinner together, or buying some of the furnishings to help the pastor and his family as they're settling in. Often we send them with some suitcases and no furniture. It's cheaper to buy it there, but that still means you have to then buy the furniture. And so if you're more interested in that, talk to me afterwards. And thank you for partnering with Children of Promise. We love Children of Promise. Just last year, Children of Promise began in Brazil. It had been the work of almost 2 years of meetings and translating documents, but Children of Promise is now in Brazil. And we spent about a week with the Children of Promise directors in Brazil last year for some conferences and meetings, and then we get to see them in the next day or two, and we are so excited. We love Mike and Heather Webb. And so thank you for partnering with them. It is very, very meaningful. And I have friends that are products of the Children of Promise program. People I know personally that I've known for many, many years in other countries. So I just want to say thank you for your support in that. You can go to the last slide, what I believe is the last slide. And so like Beth said earlier, we base a lot of what we do on the Great Commission. And I mean, everybody should be able to say that, right? That should be something we as Christians always say. And it's that therefore go and make disciples of all nations. And how that looks for different people is different. For Beth and I, that has meant that we go to Brazil and we live in the interior and we deal with insect bites and really long travel to get back to the U.S. It means long times apart from our families and from Taco Bell. I do love Taco Bell. But that's what it looks like for us. For other people, we know like it looks like other things. Maybe it means for pastors living in another state or another city from where they're from. But it's not just for people in ministry as clergy, as missionaries. It's for all of us as Christians. And so that could be something as simple as trying to share the gospel with that neighbor next door that really annoys you because they mow at 10 o'clock every night. We had a neighbor like that 5 nights a week. It could mean making friends with a coworker who's been really difficult and giving you a hard time. It might mean sharing Christ with your family or trying to live out your Christian walk in front of family members. And we know how difficult that is because we have family members that are not saved. And we have had in the past family members that are pretty strongly against Christianity. So we know how difficult that can be. But what we know is when when Christ was giving this command at the end of Matthew, Christ was not saying, go therefore and make disciples, but only you and you and you. He wasn't saying that. He was saying that to everyone. It is your job as a Christian to go and make disciples of all nations. And so we just want to challenge you to be in prayer, to spend time seeking God's face. Where are you giving me a ministry opportunity that maybe I wasn't looking for? And that's a scary prayer to pray. As I began praying that a few years ago, it meant inviting people into our home when I really didn't want to. And it meant doing things that made me uncomfortable. But we have found that there is no greater joy, there is no greater honor than living out the calling God places on your life when you decide to accept it. Brother Michael, will you come?
We partner with missionaries. We partner with other Church of God groups for a reason. Go make disciples, right? And as he was mentioning, there are people that are called to do that. There are people that are called to do what I do, right, which is pastor at the local church. There are people that are called to do youth ministry. There are people that are called to go onto street corners and preach the gospel. And we're grateful that we have people within the Church of God that are willing to change the way they live to follow Jesus. And so we want to say thank you. And we definitely want to partner with them. Amen? Listen, I don't know if you got it or not, but because of what they do, because of their obedience, and you'll find this in your life, because of your obedience to what God calls you to, number one, you can't help but be different. But number two, people's lives change when you're willing to do that. And so this morning, I'm going to ask for the ushers to come forward. We're going to give our offering, our normal tithes, our normal offerings. But along with that, as I mentioned over the last couple of weeks, what I wanted to do is make sure that we give a love offering as well. And so if you've got a love offering, if you think, you know what, I really want to just do a little extra partner today, here's what we're going to do. If you would just maybe, if you're writing a check, just put, hey, I want this extra to go to the Todds. We will make sure that they get that money to go with them in their journey. It is expensive. Travel internationally is pricey right now. Their ministry, I'm sure they come across different things that they deal with. So I want to encourage you as we give back to them. I also want to encourage you with this. He mentioned, they have lots of people that have said, we're called to be missionaries. Be mindful of what God is calling you to. And here's what I'll tell you. God doesn't just call young people. He doesn't just call people that are just graduating college. It doesn't matter what your age is. Listen to what he has to say. Ushers, would you come forward? Heavenly Father,